October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates.
You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The nation braces itself for a cold and poor winter as the Labour Party is set to hold a vote on the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance. But we will be reviewing Labour's own analysis that said such a move could kill 4,000 people. The Princess of Wales has announced she has completed her course of chemotherapy and intends to focus on staying cancer-free with the return of light engagements expected towards the end of the year. In a State of the Nation first, I will be talking about association football as the England manager, Lee Carsley, turns out to be a Republican after refusing to sing the national anthem. Plus, the author of a damning new report into the BBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war joins me live in the studio as it alleges the broadcaster subverted its own standards 1,500 times. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most particularly perspicacious panel, the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As ever, I want to know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Sophia Wensler.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 8 o'clock. Here are your headlines. Downing Street says Sir Keir Starmer's cabinet is united behind plans to cut winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners. It comes as Chancellor Rachel Reeves told Labour MPs that she is not immune to concerns over winter fuel allowance plans. Meanwhile, leaders of two of the biggest unions have put further pressure on the government to soften its policy. Unite and the PCS union have both criticised the plan, while Paul Nowak, head of the Trades Union Congress, says the government should rethink the plan and consider other lines of support for pensioners. MPs will vote tomorrow on plans to scrap the payment. Speaking at the TUC conference in Brighton, Paul Nowak said he'll work with the government to rebuild public services.
We'll play our part in recasting Britain's industrial future. And above all, we'll work with the government to face down those on the right who wish to sow division and discord in our communities. And our message to the tin pot politicians, the street thugs and any ragtag group that try to promote their message of hate is clear. Not in our workplaces, not in our communities, not on our watch.
In other news, victims of domestic abuse are facing sleepless nights ahead of Labour's early prison release scheme. That's according to the Domestic Abuse Commissioner. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Nicole Jacobs warned that some victims may not be aware that their attackers could soon be free. Up to 1,750 offenders will be released tomorrow under the Ministry of Justice's emergency plan to ease the overcrowding crisis in UK jails. Now, the Princess of Wales has finished her chemotherapy treatment and said her focus is to stay cancer-free. She made the announcement in a heartfelt family video showing her spending private time with Prince William and her children. Princess Catherine revealed in March that she was undergoing cancer treatment and has been out of the public eye since then. She is set to carry out a few engagements this year, which could include remembrance events in November and her annual Christmas Carol concert. And gun salutes have marked the anniversary of the King's accession today. A 62-gun royal salute was fired by the Honourable Artillery Company at the Tower of London and marks the 2-year anniversary of King Charles's taking to the throne. Earlier, the 41-gun salute took place at Hyde Park in London. That salute fired by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. It also marks the passing of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. Now it's back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. It seems there are no depths to which the Labour government will not sink. A week ago, the Commons leader, Lucy Powell, claimed the winter fuel allowance needed to be cut, otherwise the economy would have crashed. For context, the cost to the Treasury of the winter fuel allowance is about £2.2 billion. This claim of crashing the economy derives from Labour's fantasy £22 billion black hole, which they say was caused by the Tories, but in fact was created by them. Half of it came from the government's decision to grant inflation-busting pay rises to their union chums. In other words, £9 billion for the public sector, including, of course, the famously, if not infamously, well-paid train drivers. Ivor the engine would be very happy. But that won't crash the economy, and a mere £2.2 billion will. Odds fish. Let's go back to the Labour Party of 2017, back in the days before Sir Keir Starmer changed his mind about a second referendum, back in the days before he changed his mind on the winter fuel allowance. It was the Labour Party's own analysis that claimed removing it would kill 4,000 people. So is Starmer now happy to kill 4,000 people? Perhaps it will speed up his support for assisted suicide, on which he has promised to vote. But perhaps 2017 is so far in the distant past that we can ignore it. But what about 2022, just 2 years ago? At this point, Starmer had changed his mind on a second referendum and indeed a whole host of other subjects, probably including his friendship with Jeremy Corbyn. But he hadn't yet changed his mind on the winter fuel allowance. He tweeted, "Looking ahead to winter is frightening. I've met pensioners who have no idea how they'll heat their homes, parents who will have to skip meals so their kids can eat. The Tories are too busy fighting each other to notice. Labour has a plan that meets the scale of the crisis." You can hear the violin sound in the background at this dolorous statement by Sir Keir Starmer. Well, we know what his plan is now, to take money from pensioners and give it to their mates in the public sector. Indeed, it was only several months ago when he said this in the House of Commons.
Last year, the Prime Minister was apparently drawing up plans to remove the winter fuel allowance from pensioners. So will he now rule out taking pensioners' winter fuel payments off them to help fund his £46 billion black hole?
But lo and behold, Sir Flip-Flop strikes again, this time on the pensioners. His decision not only to flip-flop on the winter fuel payment, but also to destroy our domestic energy production, means this winter the country faces the prospect of being cold and poor. As ever, let me know your views. Email mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by John Rentoul, very distinguished chief political commentator for The Independent. John, thank you so much for... It was nice to see you, and thank you for joining me. don't you think that Labour has mishandled this enormously, even if there is a case to be made for getting rid of universal benefits?
Well, I don't see how you can handle that case much better than they've done. I mean, maybe Keir Starmer's overdone the doom and gloom, but if you're going to take some tough decisions, which he said in advance that he would, he said that in the election campaign, you're going to have to take some tough decisions, and people are going to be upset about it.
Yes, of course, and government is to choose, to govern is to choose. But this is a relatively small amount of money in the scheme of government expenditure. And isn't it better to wean people off benefits rather than to do it in a single blow like this, to grandfather people who are already getting it and to ease the pain? Because the people on the cusp will be very dependent on this money.
Well, yes, that is true. And that was true when your party proposed it in 2017, Jacob. I mean, you stood on a manifesto. You were a Conservative MP in 2017. You stood on a manifesto that promised to means test the winter fuel allowance. So
but this isn't means testing it. This is just applying it to a certain category.
No, it's means
some
testing
people,
it because it
up to a point. But some people who aren't on the pensioner credit means will not be greater than those on pensioner credit. So it's not actually a proper means test.
Well, pension credit is a means-tested benefit, is it not? And if you are going to withdraw the winter fuel payment from everyone who is not on pension credit, which is what Rachel Reeves is doing, then that is means testing the winter fuel allowance, which is exactly the policy that you stood on in 2017.
Is that right? Is that right?
Keir Starmer.
Because means testing would be taking into account all the means, and this is saying you only get it if you get a separate benefit, which is A, complicated to apply for, and B, you can be over by less than the amount of the winter fuel allowance and you lose the whole winter fuel allowance. And therefore that is fundamentally unfair.
Well, means testing is fundamentally unfair in many ways, Jacob. It was fundamentally unfair when you proposed it in 2017. But these are difficult decisions that governments have to make. And I mean, you say it's only a small amount of money in the scheme of things, but you haven't proposed how you would cover the gap. I mean, there is a very, very fundamental problem with the public finances over the next 5 years. A huge gap between revenues and planned spending, which the Conservatives left to Labour to sort out. And I think it's incumbent on anyone who's going to criticise Labour for taking this money away from pensioners to explain how they would fund the gap instead.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't have given it to train drivers who are extremely well paid. So it really does look as if you're a Tory voting pensioner.
That's a very insignificant amount of money. I mean, that really is.
But either we're worried about the candle ends, etc., that Gladstone once spoke of, or we're not. And if we're worried about these small amounts, giving a huge pay increase to very well-paid train drivers shows that if you're a friend of the Labour Party, your snout is in the trough. But if you're a poor elderly pensioner, who the Labour Party said might be at risk of death if they didn't get this money, they don't care.
I completely agree that the train drivers were an undeserving case, and that's a very weak spot in the government's argument. I don't defend that at all, but I do defend difficult decisions that have to be made generally to balance the public finances.
Well, John, I admire you for defending difficult decisions. It's actually one of the important things that people have to do when their side is in office. So thank you very much for taking up the cudgels on behalf of a particularly difficult decision. With me now is my panel, Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Amy, this must be quite hard for you to defend as a, broadly speaking, left-winger.
Well, the thing is, when I first heard it, and I thought, well, this makes sense because 1 in 5 pensioners are millionaires. It's a universal benefit. Why is the likes of Alan Sugar getting £300 every winter? That doesn't... I mean, I'm sure he could spend that in an hour in a pub. You know, it's not going to affect his life, is what I'm saying. He doesn't need it. But when you get down into the weeds of it and it becomes apparent that yes, there are those on the edges of this who need to be safeguarded, and perhaps there are more efficient ways of doing that, such as taking it away from the highest bracket taxpayer. That could work for pensioners. But I think the thing that I read today, which really hammered how I feel about this, is that winter fuel allowance is £300. The energy companies make £1,000 per household on average. So if we're going to find money anywhere, let's find it in the profits of the massive energy companies who are making £1,000 off each of us every single year.
Tim, the Tories said they'd do it anyway. Isn't it actually right to get rid of universal benefits? Universal benefits are a bad way of spending taxpayers' money.
It's a paradoxical situation, isn't it? Labour created this benefit and now wants to take it away. The Tories have always been critical of it and now are rushing to its defence. I should add that what the government would say, of course, is that your pension has gone up. And
thanks to the Conservatives.
Thanks to the Conservatives.
Who introduced the triple lock.
But the problem is that, and the other problem is that insufficient numbers of people are claiming pension credit who could. So that's what they would say if they were here. What I find interesting is the position of the left of the Labour Party, who feel that the government is being miserly and miserable in its messaging and now is embracing a form of austerity in its policy. And what they're saying is, look, we did not enter Parliament in order to cut benefits like this. And there's a possibility tomorrow of a significant rebellion of up to 50 MPs voting against it, including, of course, independents who Starmer's already kicked out of the party. And I just want to add that there was education questions today, which included covering the VAT rise on private schools. There were a number of Labour MPs who raised questions about that, because the issue for them is you've got kids with special needs and with anxieties using private education. How are they going to be hurt? So it's very interesting to see the left beginning to kick up a stink about a Labour government, which they see as, they agree to some of its policies, but they don't understand why the budget is being balanced on the backs of some taxpayers and voters who need cash from government.
I think that Keir Starmer would probably say that because of the triple lock, they're not going to lose £300 elsewhere, like a tax-paying in work person who doesn't have the triple lock. So they are ripe to be taxed because they're protected in other ways. But on the VAT subject, if you do have a learning disability, you are actually exempt from the VAT rise. So that's probably important that parents know.
But you've got to have a statement and it's quite complicated. But they could put the £300 on the pension, bring it automatically into tax. They could say that it's grandfathered, so anyone who's currently getting it will carry on, but new people won't. The problem with taking away £300 from people who, by and large, are not well off, is that their budget includes that £300. And therefore you make them noticeably worse off. And exclude the Alan Sugars. The Alan Sugars are so peripheral that the administration...
peripheral.
The administration
of
taking it...
1 in 5 that are millionaires.
But that's a very misleading figure, because that's based on the value of their house. And they don't necessarily have any income to support that. And you may say they should sell their house, but that's another very difficult question that governments have shied away from in terms of social care.
Can you say there's also a benefit to a universal benefit, which is that it's easy to run and to manage. The low take-up of pension credit's an example of that. People have just not been applying for it. When people automatically get a cheque in the post, everyone's guaranteed to get it. And you can save money on bureaucracy or enforcement because it's so easy to administer.
And there comes a tipping point at which the number of people you remove from it is so low against the cost of administration.
It wasn't worth means testing.
However, the guest down the line did come up with a very important thing, which is that in 2017, Theresa May did propose this, and it was supported by many in the Conservative Party.
Yes, I wasn't Theresa May's greatest supporter, which I did like to point out to John.
It doesn't suddenly change because of which team's saying it.
But did Theresa May do it? Did Theresa May do it?
Well, she didn't do it because of the pushback of what is.
Because it turned out to be a mistake.
Well, we don't know for sure
yet. Will Sir Keir follow the pattern of Lady May? Anyway, thank you to my panel. In a moment, we'll be discussing the encouraging news revealed this afternoon by Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Plus, I'll be joined by the author of the shocking report that has called into question the editorial integrity of the BBC reporting on the Israel-Hamas war.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Sarah, welcome to the show. Obviously, you work for a tobacco company, so a little caveat there to slip in. Nevertheless, it's no surprise that the illegal market is growing so much. When you look at the cost of cigarettes in Britain, huge amounts of duty and oftentimes, of course, criminality always finds its way into the system. Tell us more about your report.
Absolutely. I mean, up to 90% of a packet of cigarettes is tax. And in the last year, there's been 2 tax increases that have equated more to the last 3 years combined. So now, if you're a roll-your-own smoker, a 30-gram pouch of roll-your-own will cost £22.50, but you can buy a counterfeit pack of 50 grams for £3. So there's a massive disparity. A lot of illegal tobacco is imported, but we do also have a problem in the UK with illegal tobacco factories. So in the last month, there's been an illegal tobacco factory in Gateshead, in Bury, busted, producing roll-your-own tobacco. And on the 12th of July this month, West Midlands gang illegal tobacco factory, the gang was found guilty of producing illegal tobacco, and that was more than £5 million lost tax revenue to the government. And actually, all of those people found guilty got a suspended sentence.
And how does that work? They're literally importing container loads of raw tobacco and packaging it up in factories in Britain. And they're using what appears to be British packaging illegally?
Yeah, some of it is branded packaging, so some of it isn't the kind of unbranded packaging we'd see on cigarettes and roll-your-own now, but it's relatively simple to reproduce, especially RYO. Our own pack swap data now shows that about 50% of the roll-your-own market is illegal tobacco.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You've been sending in your mail, Moggs, as we were discussing the winter fuel allowance. And Paul says, is it possible that Labour will scrap the winter fuel allowance using a statutory instrument, thereby avoiding the need for House of Lords approval? No, it doesn't work like that. Statutory instruments, unless the supporting bill provides otherwise, go to both Houses of Parliament, even financial ones. Graham, the cost of pensioners' winter fuel payments is only around 3 times what the government wastes on diversity officers. There must be easier savings to be made. Graham, I think you're absolutely spot on. And Jaden, says, hope you get your winter fuel payment. I'm not old enough. I'm years to go before I get my winter fuel payment. You sound like you have a cold coming. There's going rather than coming. Nonetheless, flip-flop Starmer strikes again. No backbone, no integrity. This is New Labour. Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, has announced in a video featuring her husband and children that she has completed her course of chemotherapy. Positive news means that she will increasingly return to public life by the end of this year. It comes after the Princess announced her cancer diagnosis in March and stopped doing any public engagements other than attending Trooping the Colour and presenting the trophy at the final of Wimbledon. Well, I'm joined now by the royal biographer Angela Levin, but Angela, before we talk, I think we can see a little clip of the video that she released.
As the summer comes to an end, I cannot tell you what a relief it is to have finally completed my chemotherapy treatment. Doing what I can to stay cancer-free is now my focus. Although I have finished chemotherapy, my path to healing and full recovery is long, and I must continue to take each day as it comes.
Well, Angela, thank you for coming in. You obviously know the royal family very well. This is encouraging news.
It's very encouraging news, but it's also a real revelation of what she is really like as a person. And I think that's very interesting too, because we've looked at her, we've always thought that she's marvellous and wonderful, but you don't see inside. And this really showed you what she felt deep down and how she's dealt with it and how she's analysed what she has to do and how difficult it's been and how wonderful her friends, her parent and William has been. And the children, they were all round her. And I think they knew it was being filmed because the little one said, "Are they still filming?" So, you know, they weren't putting on a sort of phony act, but they wanted to be part of it and they wanted to keep cuddling her and holding her. And as I said just before, we went on that Prince William kissed her in public, which, as you said, the Queen would never have allowed. But it's opening up for him. He's so different. When you compare the two brothers, he's had a wonderful wife who has brought out the very best.
To God bless the Princess of Wales. In a moment, Thames Water is in crisis. But what could this mean for you?
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Some clear spells overnight and a cool night compared with recent nights, but it is turning increasingly unsettled towards the north of the UK with weather systems arriving from the Atlantic. It's not something we've seen for a week or so, and that means heavy and at times persistent rain across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and North Wales through the night. Cloudy skies sinking south as well, but we keep some clear spells towards the East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England. 11 or 12 Celsius first thing here, but high single figures, low double figures typically elsewhere, and lower humidity compared with the last week or so. So a more comfortable night for sleeping, even if it is an unsettled start to Tuesday with wet and windy weather sweeping through northern Scotland. I think Shetland and Orkney could see some disruption from heavy rain and strong winds during the day, as well as blustery weather for western Scotland, Northern Ireland, heavy showers and gusty winds. An area of rain sinks south during the morning across northern England, reaching North Wales and parts of the Midlands by lunchtime. Ahead of that, we've got thickening cloud for southern parts, with a few showers moving into Wales in the southwest, perhaps one or two developing later in the southeast. So effectively, it's a showery day, but with some longer spells of rain at times, for example, the end of the day across southern parts. 19 Celsius in the south, 11 in the far north and northeast with 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and the wind coming from the Arctic. Now, that Arctic wind is going to sweep across all parts by Wednesday. That means it's going to feel cold in the wind, unusually so for the time of year. Frequent showers moving through as well, particularly in the north and northwest, but some sunshine in between, so it's not going to be a complete washout. Fewer showers on Thursday and Friday, more rain in the north this weekend.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained. I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. We were talking about the Princess of Wales and the Rees-Moggs have come in. Jane says, Jacob, who was the member of the royals who knighted you? Well, I was very honoured to be knighted by the Princess Royal about a year ago. Philip, the one thing the country needed was some good news. So I'm very pleased the Princess of Wales has made it that far. I think that view is shared by the whole country. Well, Sinn Féin MPs cannot take their seats in Parliament because they will not take an oath to the Crown. They do not accept the legitimacy of the constitutional settlement. Wanting to change it by democratic means is perfectly reasonable, and free speech must, of course, be upheld. But the same principle applies to England football managers. They must support the nation whose team they seek to lead, even if they themselves are foreign. Singing the national anthem is a symbol of this, and if they will not accept the symbol, they should not hold the post. This applies to Lee Carsley, who needs to zone out of his Irish republicanism and learn to sing God Save the King. Otherwise, no one will believe he cares about the England team he wishes to lead. Well, my most perspicacious panel is with me, the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Tim, surely if you want to lead England, you should sing the song for England.
Well, he used to work for the Irish football team. Do you think that when he did that, he should have had to sing the Irish national anthem? You do?
Yes, of course.
But if he's English, how on earth can he sing something that implies allegiance to another country?
Because he's showing allegiance to a foreign country by leading their football team. He's got to show full allegiance, copper-bottomed allegiance. Leading the English football team, not that I'm particularly interested in football, or the England cricket team, is about showing that you are fully committed to England winning, whoever it takes on. And if you're not willing to sing the anthem, then that shows you're not fully committed.
But of course, you mentioned in your brilliant opening the constitutional settlement. Now, there are people who may well support England, but don't wish to say God Save the King.
They're entitled to campaign to change it.
Yes.
Of course they are. And when it's changed, they can sing Aux armes les citoyens, or whatever blood-curdling anthem of a Republican nature they wish to sing.
Well, OK, I support the monarchy in principle, but of course I support the Stuart line, not the Windsor one.
But which predates God Save the King. Amy, let me bring you in. If you want to be the England manager, which I think you would do brilliantly,
thank you.
Surely you should at least sing the national anthem.
I think I need to rein you two in. You're talking about football. It's a football game.
I don't care about that.
I'm not talking about allegiance to the king. We're not talking about pride of country or any
but
of
you
that.
are.
We're
That's the whole point.
Football.
Football represents the country. Think how interested the country is.
Yeah, but a lot of the country aren't interested in
they are when England gets to a final.
Football. So shall we just scrap the national anthem and sing like "It's Coming Home" or whatever that song
or
is?
The English are best, which was France and Swan's proposal.
Fans really care. What football fans care about is winning the football.
I think they do care about being English.
If this guy starts winning us matches, then will you all just forget
I'm sorry, Amy, but if there is one demographic in this country that cares about being English, I suspect it's football fans.
You can care about being English and not sing the national anthem.
Yeah. Well, isn't the point with this guy that he couldn't be bothered? Isn't it? Or not bothered, but he was distracted because he was thinking about the game.
He's in the wrong zone.
Lots of people haven't sung it. Wayne Rooney, he didn't used to sing it. Everybody's fine with that.
Right.
Like, it's his decision. Isn't it wonderful that we live in a nation where he cannot sing the national anthem and we're all cool with it?
I think
that's freedom.
I think it depends on the job you want to do. That you may be somebody who is an anarchist and doesn't believe in enforcing the law, then you shouldn't become a parking attendant.
But if that anarchist was really good at football management,
but if you're a football manager, your job is to promote England. Yes. That's your role.
Your job is to win football matches.
For England.
For England.
And therefore you should be so committed, so patriotic towards England that you should sing the national anthem.
You cannot live in a country where we force.
Poor old John Redwood.
But it's also a bit depressing, isn't it, that we live in a country in which the person in charge of the football team doesn't feel moved to sing when he hears the national anthem.
He just wants to concentrate on the football.
That's the most dishonest argument I've ever heard.
You see, if a Chinese football manager did that, they would just shoot him.
That's my point. Isn't it wonderful that we live in a country where you cannot sing it and not get shot?
No, we shouldn't have him as the football manager. It should be somebody who actually believes in the country and wants the country to succeed. It means he doesn't care. He did also go off on the football match against Ireland to the Irish team's seat. At the end. So
yes,
I think you've got to wonder where his sympathies really lie. If he won't sing the national anthem, he goes off to the Irish team place.
Yes. Well, the compromise is obvious. He can whistle.
Yeah.
He can whistle. Whistle while you work. That's the latest proposal. Well, Thames Water's debt has been bought up by major US hedge funds. Companies are buying the debt at discounted prices and inevitably hope to make a profit. This is capitalism in action, and the company ought to be allowed to go bust without any state bailout. The hedge funds may, or may not, but they may have sufficient security to do well. But if they don't and they lose money, they load the risk. And if they lose money, it lowers the capital value of Thames Water, and that could mean prices for consumers come down. Well, I'm joined now by Ewan McGahey, the Professor at King's College London and expert on water regulation. Thank you very much for coming in. I mean, I'm really pleased to see the hedge funds buying the debt at a discount, because you're taking out people like the Canadian pension and so on, who are teachers, who are big infrastructure investors. They recognise they've made a bad investment. They're selling it off probably too cheaply. I mean, I think it was a great opportunity to buy as an investor. And now the market takes its course. And if Ofwat doesn't give Thames Water all the money it wants and it becomes insolvent, well, there are huge assets that the bonds are secured on. The shareholders will lose everything. The bondholders will lose some of their initial capital, but the market goes on.
Well, water regulation is very different to other kinds of insolvencies for other companies. So if Thames Water goes into what we call special administration, it's not like where a normal business goes bust and then the creditors take control. The government takes control in a special administration. And what the procedure allows the government to do is insist that the bondholders take a haircut, and that can be down to zero. So if we take a step back for a second, we have a huge failure with Thames Water, and Elliott Management, this vulture fund buying up the debt, is a symbol of how badly it's failed. Thames Water wants to put up bills by 44%. They have paid £158 million in dividends to shareholders just this year. The CEO got £1.7 million in his pay when they had 350 pollution incidents. So, what we really need to ensure is that Elliott Management and the other bondholders in the consortium that think they can get rich quick out of our water companies aren't given a bailout by the government.
Oh, I completely agree with you on that. And you make the very important point that the special administration means that the bondholders can lose everything. Now, the assets are still there, so whether losing everything is right, I don't know. But the previous management and shareholders have behaved appallingly. They behaved rapaciously. They overpaid themselves. Interest rates went up. They had index-linked debt that then made their situation even worse. The shareholders and the bondholders deserve to suffer the consequences.
I think that is broadly correct. I mean, of course, there's a failure of regulation, and taking a step back, it's the broader failure of privatisation since 1989. So we've had £85.2 billion paid to shareholders since then. Water is a natural monopoly competition.
But we've also had billions of investment in water that we wouldn't have got from the government, and we know why we wouldn't get it from the government, because you would have the appeal that it should go to the pensioners for their winter fuel, or that it should go to the NHS, and that actually taxpayer investment in water prior to privatisation was lower than the levels that we've seen subsequently.
Well, I think that it's inaccurate to say that we've had more investment than we would have done if water was kept in a well-run public ownership model. On the contrary, we are going to pay about £12.5 billion over the next Parliament to private water company shareholders if we keep on doing the same thing as before. There will be 40% more investment if we had, what 90% of the countries around the world do, which is public ownership and control of water.
But
so
public ownership
really
doesn't lead to investment, because the state doesn't have excess capital. And there was never an example of a well-run public utility prior to privatisation. Not one of them, not British Telecom, not the Electricity Board, not British Gas, and not water. And the investment's been enormous, improved the water quality, reduced the leaks. There are still failings, but that's been a huge benefit of privatisation.
We might disagree on the history of whether there were well-run utilities. There are certainly better-run utilities all around the world, and Scottish Water does better than most English water companies, and it is in public ownership. So, we can see different ways forward, but I think that one thing that most people would agree upon is that we shouldn't be bailing out large banks.
Absolutely agree on that.
With public money. And what, most importantly, most of the investment is coming from bill payers, and so they should have a stake in a democratically run public service.
But if the capital collapses, then the return on capital reduces. Bill payers should get a cut. They should benefit.
There's lots of details.
Anyway, we've got to end with my little comment. But thank you very much to Ewan and to my panel. Coming up, I will be joined by the man who has called the entire BBC editorial agenda into question after he released his damning report into coverage of the Israel-Hamas war.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Top gear to top beer. See what we did there. Jeremy Clarkson. Hundreds of people have been queuing to be some of the first punters inside Jeremy Clarkson's new pub in Oxfordshire. It's called the Farmer's Dog, and it opened to the public at midday yesterday. Now, I mean, this is it's called the Farmer's Dog, and it's just outside of Burford, just off the A40. Jeremy Clarkson brought it with him, and yesterday there was a 4-hour queue for a pint at the newly opened bar. The serious point of this story, and what, to be fair, Clarkson's doing, is like he's done with his farm, Did This What Farm, which has been a very popular TV series. Is actually promoting the British pub. Jonathan, we know they're closing at a rate of knots in this country. Because this is Jeremy Clarkson's comment on why Sir Keir Starmer is banned. They're a hopeless bunch. Starmer hasn't done much to endear himself to me yet. Well, have a look at farming. It might turn around. You never know. So, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, the political point here, David, isn't it? It's like, you know, Jeremy Clarkson has raised, the issues of farmers in this country and how much of a struggle it is for them. And he's now doing the same for the pub trade. So there's a serious point to what Clarkson's doing.
Absolutely. I mean, these are two things which are part of our heritage: pubs and farms.
You're talking about farming. We do need to talk about farming actually, and what Brexit has done for farming. Not only what Brexit has done for farming, and now you have the government negotiating trade deals with countries, and the main things those countries want are better access for their meat in this country.
Absolutely not. It's not Brexit that is destroying farmers in this country. It is what the governments have done, both under Johnson and Sunak, and now Starmer continuing this in actually making farm subsidies related to the whole green agenda.
So we start off with a nice friendly chit-chat about a pub and straight on to the B word.
I never talk about Brexit anymore.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m, followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain, followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Over the weekend, a new report was published revealing the results of an investigation into alleged bias by the BBC in its reporting of the Israel-Hamas war. The study, led by British Israel lawyer Trevor Asserson, and carried out using artificial intelligence, found a total of 1,553 breaches of the BBC's own editorial guidelines. And these were allegedly committed by using such terms as war crimes, genocide and breaching international law up to 14 times more frequently in relation to Israel and Hamas. Along with instances of journalists and guests apparently subverting editorial standards, the report concluded the findings reveal a deeply worrying pattern of bias and multiple breaches by the BBC of its own editorial guidelines on impartiality, fairness and establishing the truth. It is worth noting that this investigation is not an independent inquiry conducted by an official body. However, its findings have led to many calls for an independent inquiry to take place. I'm really pleased now to be joined by the man behind the report, the lawyer and senior partner at Asserson Law, Trevor Asserson. Trevor, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
1,553 breaches of the BBC's own guidelines. How did they come about, and what are they? What are some of the examples?
Well, the report's 200 pages long and enumerates a whole wide variety of different breaches. But essentially, the BBC's principal raison d'etre, the reason that it has an excuse for receiving £4 billion from the British people is because it produces true news, that is to say, impartial news. And that's at the heart of the contract that the BBC has with the British people, and that's really at the heart of its guidelines, and that's what I was looking at. So what I did was probably the deepest dive that's actually ever been done that I'm aware of into approximately 9 million words over 4 months of BBC News in both English and Arabic. The Arabic was translated into English, and we looked at that with a group of lawyers bringing traditional litigation techniques, but alongside that, we added a group of data scientists who looked at it through large language model, deep data systems, devising experiments. It included professors of universities, and they brought a new perspective, a new direction and dimension to the traditional litigation approach. So that, and the two married beautifully and found very, very similar findings.
So let's divide that up. What were you finding with the traditional litigation approach? That required your group of lawyers to read all 9 million words.
That's correct.
And say, if we were to litigate, we could litigate on these words. Is that the basic principle?
They were both classifying whether or not a particular article or a particular picture would evoke sympathy in one direction or another, or would leave you relatively balanced. We would also be looking at counting the number of interviewees. We would be researching some of the interviewees to see who they were. The BBC has specific guidelines to say that in the event that an interviewee has specific affiliations, they need to be revealed. So it's extraordinary that we counted 27%. Extrapolate that, it's over 130, approximately one a day or more frequently, members of Hamas or affiliates of Hamas or supporters of Hamas who were being presented by the BBC essentially as neutral observers in a way which it's very difficult to justify as a clear breach. That's the kind of thing we found. We looked at one of the things the BBC says is that no significant strand of thought will be omitted or underrepresented. So extraordinarily, as one of the things we did was we looked at various omissions that we thought we would, as it were, find. I mean, we found something that isn't there. There is no coverage of any proper description to explain that Hamas is a terrorist organisation which is run according to the words of a charter that calls for the death of Jews and the destruction of the State of Israel. That's pretty important when it's run an 18-year strategy of trying to destroy the State of Israel.
And the BBC famously would not refer to Hamas as being a terrorist organisation from the very beginning, from last October, when the terrible attacks first happened. But tell me about how AI was used, because part of the BBC's defence is to say this was AI and therefore we don't really understand it and it's not proper.
OK, I'll just mention that point about terrorism. One of the things we looked at was the BBC actually, under pressure, agreed that it would refer to Hamas as a prescribed terrorist organisation. So we counted the number of times it did that. 12,000 mentions of Hamas, about 7% it was mentioned as a terrorist in connection with them. But the number of times that it's mentioned as a prescribed terrorist organisation, it's more likely to be referred to as a health ministry. So the British public would think of it as a health ministry, not as a prescribed terrorist organisation. That's even after the BBC said that they would do something. But what the AI did was it enabled us to take different views that we wouldn't necessarily have been able to look at. The AI could look, for instance, this is one of the most remarkable findings of the report, is we looked at a data set of all English language newspapers around the world. And that was literally millions of bits of information. We looked at the headlines for a period of 4 months for all of these newspapers, and then classified where different newspapers stood. Now, BBC Arabic was found to be, its bedfellows were the Iran Times, the Egyptian Times, Pakistan Times, and Al Jazeera. These are the bedfellows. These are the bedfellows of the BBC Arabic, and the British public is paying for this to be produced. It's, I think, very, very disappointing.
To what extent do you think you found what you were looking for? How impartial? I know it's not an impartial report, not an independent report. How far were you influenced by your own expectations?
Well, what triggered the report was feeling that this story was not being told properly. And so I thought, well, I can't take anecdotal evidence of that. I've got to do it in the traditional way, which is methodically going through the evidence and assembling it and then seeing it. It took 4 months before we could actually start counting. And I was expecting to find a failure of balance and some impartiality, and I didn't. I found a total failure of balance, a colossal lack of impartiality. I'm talking about figures, and you'll see it in the report, not sort of 60-40, but 90-93-7. In one instance, Newsnight managed a clean score of 100% negative to Israel. Now, wherever editorial discretion places balance, I don't think 100-0 is getting it right.
Very quickly, what next? Does this go to BBC Complaints and Ofcom?
Well, the BBC complaints system is broken.
All right, I'm going to have to read. Sorry, will you go to Ofcom? And
we're going to go to court.
Everybody, excellent. A BBC spokesman said, "We have serious questions about the methodology of this report, particularly its heavy reliance on AI and its interpretation of the BBC's editorial guidelines. We are required to achieve due impartiality rather than the balance of sympathy. We believe our knowledgeable and dedicated correspondents are achieving this. However, we will consider the report carefully and respond directly to the authors once we have had time to study it in detail." Trevor, thank you very much indeed. Well, next it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Yes, well, I'm back with a bang tonight. The police say sorry for ignoring jihad on the streets of Britain. Well, it's a bit late for that, isn't it? Also, Keir Starmer, he took the knee for BLM. He's got a Home Secretary who says refugees welcome. What about the elderly? Labour's own reports that nearly 4,000 people could die if he scraps the winter fuel payment. He's going to crack on and do it anyway, isn't he? The BBC, as you spoke about there, broke their editorial guidelines around 1,500 times. The National Crime Agency, the force needed to smash the gangs and stop the boats. Well, it's in tatters. They're losing more people than they're hiring. And I speak to a man who's downing a pint in every single constituency to raise awareness for British pubs.
Well, that sounds like Nigel Farage. It sounds an excellent programme. I'm Jake Rees-Mogg at 8 o'clock. This has been State of the Nation. Now, tomorrow, watch what's happening at Taunton. Somerset versus Surrey. Somerset need to win. We could win the championship.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Some clear spells overnight and a cool night compared with recent nights, but it is turning increasingly unsettled towards the north of the UK, with weather systems arriving from the Atlantic. It's not something we've seen for a week or so, and that means heavy and at times persistent rain across Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and North Wales through the night. Cloudy skies sinking south as well, but we keep some clear spells towards the East Midlands, East Anglia, South East England. 11 or 12 Celsius first thing here, but high single figures, low double figures typically elsewhere, and lower humidity compared with the last week or so. So a more comfortable night for sleeping, even if it is an unsettled start to Tuesday with wet and windy weather sweeping through northern Scotland. I think Shetland and Orkney could see some disruption from heavy rain and strong winds during the day, as well as blustery weather for western Scotland, Northern Ireland, heavy showers and gusty winds. An area of rain sinks south during the morning across northern England, reaching North Wales and parts of the Midlands by lunchtime. Ahead of that, we've got thickening cloud for southern parts, with a few showers moving into Wales in the southwest, perhaps one or two developing later in the southeast. So effectively, it's a showery day, but with some longer spells of rain at times, for example, the end of the day across southern parts. 19 Celsius in the south, 11 in the far north and northeast with 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts.